We're now ready to go ahead and build the sign in functionality, so actually allowing the created user to go ahead and sign into their account. So let's go ahead and take a look at this now. So what we're going to achieve by the end of this is the ability to click a link in the navigation, which we'll go ahead and create in a moment, be presented with a sign in form, and then sign in using login credentials, and then on the home page the message, depending on whether the user is signed in or signed out, will change. So we'll have a sort of visual indication as to whether the user is signed in or signed out, and we'll actually return the user's username as well. So we'll address the user if they are signed in by their first name. So first things first, let's go ahead and add this functionality to the navigation. So if the user isn't signed in, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new list item with an anchor. And that is going to be sign in. And we haven't created the root yet, so we'll go ahead and create the root also. Now with the create account, remember we created a post and a get. We'll do exactly the same thing, one protected by cross-site request forgery protection and one just out in the open here. So let's go ahead and define that just up here. We'll copy and paste this note or this comment. So sign in get. So the controller is just going to be exactly the same as we're used to. So root get /account /sign in, and then we have this array that defines the different properties of this. So we're going to call this account -sign in. In fact, we'll separate this by hyphens here, just so different words. And we want this to use the controller within the account controller. So account controller, and we want this to use the method get sign in. So now that we've got this, let's go ahead and just start to build up these methods. So public function get sign in. So this is going to show the sign in form, and much like with the creation of our users, we have a post sign in, which after the form submitted will process the user's login. So we've got the sign in get. Now what we need is within the cross-site request forgery protection root group, we want the sign in post functionality, and that will just be sign in post, and it will just be post sign in, and obviously it will be root post. So just to recap, we've got the sign in get, which will allow the user to view the form, and sign in post, which will be what is the root that's caught and processed when the user submits the form, because it will be post data type. So what we now need to do is go ahead and create our view. So inside of views, inside of account, let's create a new file called signin.blade.php. Let's extend this from the main layout, much like we did in create. Remember, we extended the main layout, created the section, the content section. So extend layout.main, create the content section here and stop that there, and we'll just go ahead and say sign in, just so we know we're on the right track. So within our account controller now, within get sign in, we want to return this view contents, because that's all we want to do when the user lands on the page. We're only interested in what they can see, not what they're processing at this point. So we want to view make account sign in. Let's go ahead and test this out. So inside public, let's click on sign in. We haven't actually created the link for this yet. So let's go back to the navigation file, and we'll go ahead and just basically mimic what we've done already. So URL root. Remember, let's take a look. We called the root account -sign -in. So in here we say account -sign -in, and that will just redirect the user to the account sign in page. We've extended the layout. We have the sign in output here. So now what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to close off this navigation, and we're going to build our form here. So as with before, we just go ahead and define a form action and a method. So form, action, and method. Method's going to be post. We know that because we've created a route to handle post data. Here we want to go ahead and define what controller what route we want to pass this data to, and in that case it's account sign in post. So within here we need to go ahead and start creating all of our fields and stuff, but first of all let's go ahead and build in our cross-site request forgery protection. Extremely important. So I'm going to go ahead and create a submit button, and the value of this will be sign in, and let's go ahead and check this. So when I go ahead and hit enter, click sign in, oops, we get a token mismatch exception. That's because we've not provided a token within this form, so we'll go ahead and do that now. So form token, done, and that will now give us, if we inspect this, the token here. When we submit, that goes through to our sign in post route, which routes us to the post controller. So we can clarify that just by returning hello here or something. So when we hit sign in, hello, there we go. So we now routed through to the post route post controller, this method here, and we can start to build the rest of our form. So we did a similar thing before. We create some divs with a class of field, assuming that you're grouping by some kind of styling, and all we need here is the ability to pass in an email address and a password. So input type is text, and the name of this is email. And we'll go ahead and duplicate this down to here for the password. So again, really what we just need to do is we need to do the same as we had for the create account functionality, where we validate each of these fields and then we return the data into here if things aren't valid. So we're just going to have to go through the same process as we did here and validate these two pieces of information. And luckily this is quite straightforward. So let's go ahead and start to build this up. So validator equals validator make. We pass in all of the input that we have, and we go ahead and provide an array here, which I'm going to bring down like this. And the information we provide in here is basically for the fields. So all we have here is email and password. Now this isn't as complicated as the create account validation, because all we need is this to be required, and we don't need to do this, but we might just like to validate this as an email as well, and for this we just want this to be required. So we want the email address and password just to be required. So again we do the same as we did for the create account. We check if the validator fails. If the validator does fail, we want to redirect to the sign in page. Otherwise, what we want to do is attempt user sign in. So at this point, let's just take a look at the markup here. So we've got our email and our password. I can hit sign in, and this will go through to our post thing, as we've already seen. However, we're not actually doing anything here. So if the validation fails, let's return and redirect the user to a specific route. That route is account sign in, we know that, and we then want to come down here and say with errors validator with input, because remember we want to send back the old input and keep the email address in its place. Let's go ahead and handle the error output in here then. So under email, let's go ahead and say if errors has email. Well, what do we want to output? Well, we want to output errors first email, and we want to do that for this field, and we want to do that for this field as well, which is obviously called password. Okay, perfect. So let's go ahead and check this works. So hit sign in. The email field is required. Password field is required. Let's send a dodgy email address. Sign in. The email format is invalid. I've also noticed that the input field for the password should be a type of password. Okay, so we want to keep the email input if it's anything goes wrong with the validation. So remember, because we send with input, we have access to this input old method, and we can access fields like that. So we create an inline if statement or a ternary operator, and here we just say value equals, and then we concatenate on input old email, and otherwise we do nothing. We just output empty string. So here we're just again checking for any old input and then outputting it if that is incorrect. So in this case, when we enter an email address and a password, this stays so a user can just quickly correct it and then enter their password and be on their way and start to sort of validate their actual user input. So or their session or authentication or whatever. So now that we've done this is all that we need to do. We have built the form and all that. So now the else actually involves the user attempting authentication. So we're going to create a variable called auth, and this is going to be using the auth model and the attempt static method. Now with the attempt static method, we pass in an array, and also we can comma separate on a true or false value for whether or not we want to remember the user. That will be in the next part of the video, the series. We'll be looking at how we can remember a user and how they can decide if they want to be remembered or not. So what do we want to do here? Well, we want to create an array and pass in the email, and that's just input get email. And we also want to pass in a password, which is, and this is a plain text password that we're passing in, and the attempt method will go ahead and it will hash it, and well, it will do all the hash checks for us. What we also want to do is make sure the user is active. So we want to also define that the user must be active. So now we've attempted the auth of the user. If this is successful, sessions will be set and the user will be logged in. But what we want to do is we want to go ahead and actually check if this is the case. So we want to create an if statement, if auth. And we're going to do something a little bit different here, and we're going to redirect to the intended page. And I'll try my best to explain what this actually means. So I'm going to return redirect intended /. So if, for example, a user comes to our website and wants to go ahead and access the URL account / change password, and they're not signed in, that's the intended URL. Their intended URL or their intended destination is to change their password. They're not signed in, so we're going to redirect them to the sign in page. Then they're going to sign in, and if the authorization is successful, we're going to redirect them to their intended page, basically the page that they wanted to come to before they were prompted to sign in. And we'll be looking at how we handle this later when we do the authorization group within our routes here. We already have our guest authorization group, or our unauthenticated group, but we'll be creating one for our authenticated users as well. So obviously, as before, if everything fails, what we actually want to do is we want to go ahead and down here just provide a last fallback. So for example, if the user's username and password don't match, we want to go ahead and redirect them to a page, and say there was a problem signing you in. So we want to return redirect route, and this is account sign in. And we want to say with global, there was a problem signing you in. Have you activated? Okay, so this is the sort of last resort. There was a problem signing you in. Have you activated your account? We could even take this away here and then do an else here and do exactly the same thing and do something like email password wrong, or account not activated. So we've got sort of our last resort if nothing here works, if something goes horribly wrong, and then we check the authorization, redirect the intended URL, which we'll look at later on in the series, and then otherwise we return redirecting basically back to the sign in page with an error saying your email and password combination was wrong. So let's go ahead and enter my correct email, but let's go ahead and enter a wrong password. Hit sign in. Email password wrong or account not activated. So that's the error if we have an incorrect combination of email and password. Let's go ahead and I'm going to sign in correctly. Sign in. Perfect. I'm now actually signed in, so it's getting exciting. You'll notice that the navigation's changed, and that's because earlier, remember, we created an if statement within the navigation that says if auth, do nothing, otherwise give us a sign in and create an account links. So here we can just test this by writing test, and there we see that we're logged in. So let's go back to here and remove that because that's useless for now. What we'll in fact do now is actually perform a quick check on the home page just to see if the user's logged in or not. So we've already sort of seen the auth check functionality, so the auth model and the check method. Hello, we'll just type in Alex for there now, and otherwise we'll say you are not signed in. In this case we'll just pop that in a paragraph as well. So what's happening here is we're checking if the user is signed in or not. In this case it's outputting hello Alex. We are not using a dynamic name here, we'll do that in just a moment, but otherwise it will be you are not signed in. So here we want a sort of dynamic name. So all I'm going to do is say auth user username. That's it. We're accessing this user method, which is returning an object of all of my user details, and in fact I can access username, I can access email if I wanted to. Let's leave it at username for now, obviously that makes more sense, and there we go, it says hello Alex. But just to demonstrate that that will change, I can go ahead and access Alex user email if I want, and that will give me my email address out. Pretty useless in greeting a user, but there we are. So we've now created our sign in functionality and the ability to actually sign a user in, and we've got a sort of signifier as to whether a user is signed in or not, and everything seems to be working. All that's left to do now is actually allow the user to sign out. So in the next video we'll be looking at adding another navigation item and a very, very quick controller method just to basically sign the user out and redirect them.